How did you find yourself in an apprenticeship? How did you find a mentor? And I'm not asking so much unless you want to share that, but my question isn't logistical. It's not like, did you meet in the grocery store? Did someone say, hey, you should talk to that's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, how did you go from moving through life in what actually is a very typical way? Maybe there are many people who aren't as successful as you were, but with a kind of disconnection, I'll just say. And then to find yourself willing and able to craft a mentorship relationship, because the couples that I work with, I think, I don't want to say all because I can't be certain about that, but certainly most of the men would love to have a worthy mentor in their lives, but how to go from where they are, both within them and to find somebody. I mean, I guess the answer of finding someone is this is a service you're providing now, but there's a existential shift that needs to occur to be ripe for a mentor, particularly for a man. Would you speak to your process or what you've learned guiding others in doing that?
I'm going to sort of speak about two parts. One is initiation, and then two is my sort of personal openness. But, initiation in many ways, which has sort of been stripped from our Western culture, was meant to do a couple primary things. One of which is to help bring a man into contact with power and powerlessness. And so Richard Rohr, who's this Franciscan monk, has this great quote about, until a man is brought on a journey of powerlessness, he will always abuse power. And so I think many of us men just haven't experienced what it's like to be put in a position of healthy powerlessness. Some of us have experienced uncontained powerlessness through abuse and trauma and, violence and those types of things. But
and a general feeling of a lack of agency and sovereignty in life.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
because you're saying those kinds of traumas, I'm thinking actually going through medical training is something that creates a sense of powerlessness, which typically wouldn't be considered a trauma, but it functions in that way. Or being in the military for 20 years, same thing.
Right. Because those are contained, right? There's structure around them. And, so I think many of us as men, and I felt this as a young man as well, tended to avoid being in this sort of not necessarily submissive position, but certainly a junior position where there's somebody else that has a certain potency and level of power and agency in your life to influence you. And I think that my current mentor and close friend, Dewey Freeman, says that power is the ability to influence and be influenced. That power is a reciprocal dynamic. And so I think for many of us as men, we're seeking to try and find a sense of power. But to have a mentorship means that we are going to be inherently influenced. And that can be a very threatening thing for a man, to know that he's putting himself in a position of allowing himself to be so deeply influenced by another man. And so I think I'll shift personally. That was something that I was sort of craving. I grew up, I had two family systems. My parents divorced when I was 3. My dad remarried when I was 5. My mom remarried when I was 6. They both had a daughter with these other people when I was 7. They both had a son when I was 10 and 11. So I grew up between these two family systems, and I had, a wonderful grandfather who was in my life and taught me a lot. And so I really valued that type of older masculine wisdom. And it was something that I was open to and sought because I knew the value of it. And so when my life sort of fell apart, this mentor of mine had been in my life prior. I had met him a few times before in my previous career. And it was one of those things where I opened up to him and confided in him about what had been going on. And it's almost like he sort of knew that there was this relationship that was unfolding. But I think one of the things that was very helpful was that I was just deeply curious about the wisdom that I could feel from him. There was something tangible about it that felt safe and nourishing and felt like a kind of gift to me that I hadn't really felt before. And so I had this sort of sense enough to follow that. It wasn't rational. It definitely wasn't the rational thing to do at the time or the logical thing to do. But there was just this sort of gut sense of, you need to spend as much time with this man as possible, because there's something that he has to offer. And in many ways, I think it was the wisdom of an elder, like a real elder. And I think those are sometimes in our modern culture few and far between. But I think it was the curiosity was part of it. I think the other part was I was okay with being in this position of the mentee, of being influenced by somebody in that capacity and trusting somebody in that way. It felt very healing for me. And I gained so much, out of that dynamic. And so I think those were some of the prerequisites in terms of how I fit, like the logistics of it, right? I mean, like I said, he was in my life prior. I think it is very challenging to find a mentor. I think there's sort of the cliche sayings of like, when the student is ready, the master will appear, and that kind of stuff. And I do think that there's a certain level of fate and serendipity that plays into finding somebody who can guide us and be that guide. And I've had a number of mentors that have come into my life over the years since then that, have just sort of found their way onto my doorstep. But I think that it's my inherent internal curiosity to seek out that type of wisdom, rather than the just sort of over accumulation of knowledge and information that we can kind of get trapped in within our modern culture. So I think those are some of the ingredients that we can embody when we want to move towards that, if it's something that interests us.